Hello beautiful people, welcome back to another video. I am really excited to make this video today because this is a topic that I've kind of been obsessed with for the past few months. I've really been anticipating making a video about it and I wanted to do it a while ago, but I started researching it more and more and just kept finding out so much information on it, and I really just wanted to make sure that I learned as much as I could so I can do this topic justice, I guess. I could go into so much depth about this, so I'll probably make like a part 2 or an update video, a follow-up video to this one later on when it gets closer, but I will just touch on the main points that I found about this topic and try to explain everything the best that I can. So the topic is this big conjunction that's happening in January 2020 between Pluto and Saturn and a few other friends, which I'll get to in a moment. And the orb of influence for this conjunction has kind of been like 2018 up until 2021, but the exact date of this conjunction is January 12th, 2020, and Saturn and Pluto will be conjunct in 22 degrees of Capricorn. So first I'm going to take a few minutes to describe the Saturn and Pluto archetypes just so you can get a feel for what this transit is all about. So first of all, the Saturn archetype, it's kind of known as the shittiest planet of all of them, but it gets a bad rap. Like all planets, there are the positive and the negative aspects, and Saturn gets a really bad rap sometimes because Saturn is associated with limitation and restriction. It is boundaries, it is time, it is material, it rules the material physical earth. It is the strict father, the CEO, the government, the big corporations. It is this strict authority that kind of rules and governs our lives. It is the patriarch, the dominance hierarchy. It represents our careers, our status, our aspirations. I always picture the goat that is climbing up the mountain one hoof at a time, I guess I should say. On one hand, Saturn can seem really shitty because it wants to contract, it wants to limit. But on the other hand, we really need Saturn because without boundaries and time and limitations and restrictions, there would be no physical, tangible thing. The good part about Saturn is it brings our creative ideas down through the chakras into the physical world. And when that process occurs, that idea undergoes all of these limitations, these constraints to bring it forth into a physical, tangible form. But the shadow aspects of this archetype can be that it's too strict, it's too disciplined. The classic workaholic is a perfect example of the Saturn Capricorn archetype, which, by the way, Saturn is Capricorn's ruling planet. So with Saturn being in Capricorn, it is coming into its strength. It's at home in this sign, and so that just strengthens and grounds the potency of this transit. Now, the Pluto archetype is kind of known as the destroyer. Pluto is the god of the underworld. It is ruled by Scorpio in the 8th house, so it's very much into the secrets, the underbelly of society. It wants to know what lies beneath the surface, and when Pluto comes through, it wants to just cause upheaval. It wants to bring everything up to the forefront of our attention and expose things for what they truly are. So where Saturn represents our government, big business, corporations, education, religious institutions, the structures that govern our society, Pluto represents the detective. So when Pluto and Saturn meet up, Pluto is going to cause a very big disruption in the structures that govern our lives, and it wants to change something. It wants to destroy things so that Saturn can rebuild back on top of it. So Pluto may get a bad rap because it is known for causing catastrophes, for disrupting life and triggering these typically bad things to happen. But on the upside of Pluto, it provides us with these big opportunities to learn and grow and rebuild. So just like the goat analogy, with Saturn in Capricorn, we have this goat climbing up the mountain, and when Pluto comes by, it causes an earthquake and it separates the mountains. I just picture like these goats that are climbing and they're hanging on, and then the mountains start splitting, and the goats that have stuck to their integrity and who have really laid a firm foundation for their pursuits and ambitions are going to remain on the mountain. But on the other hand, the weak goats who have been denying all of these problems and not doing the inner work and not having a firm foundation are just going to fall through. And I think that is going to be be something that we're probably gonna see. The weak goats may be falling down the mountain on this transit, and the strong goats will continue to thrive, and they may even get a boost from this transit to climb higher because the competitors have kind of fallen down. So for those of you who don't know, I guess I should explain a little bit about what a conjunction is in astrology. So it's kind of the same thing as the moon cycle. So when you have a new moon, that is the beginning and the end of the moon cycle. It goes from the new moon, then you have the full moon on the opposite side, and then in between that you have the 2 quarter moons. So you have new moon, quarter moon, full moon, quarter, new. And so that's the same thing as this bigger astrological cycle of Pluto and Saturn. You have the conjunction, which is when they're together in one sign, and then you have the hard aspects of the square, the opposition, the square, conjunction. So it's kind of the same deal as that. So each of these hard aspects of the Saturn-Pluto cycle are usually where these dynamic points happen. Usually some kind of change or event or disruption happens at these hard aspects, but the conjunction is the start and end of the cycle. Okay, so just to put some things in context, Saturn spends about 2.5 years in each sign. So its complete cycle through all of the signs lasts about 28 to 30 years. It takes Saturn 28 to 30 years to get back where it started. Pluto spends about 11 to 31 years in each sign, and this is because Pluto has such an eccentric orbit. It's kind of like a big oval, and it's not really a steady, reliable orbit like Saturn is. It's kind of like the nature of the Saturn-Pluto archetypes. So Pluto's complete cycle lasts about 248 years. So that's kind of a big deal. It takes Pluto 2.5 centuries to make it all the way back to where it started. And since Pluto is kind of like, it goes tight around the sun and then it goes like way out there, and it's kind of like this oval shape, it will typically spend about half of its orbit going through half of the signs, and then when it goes way out here, it's a much slower moving through the signs. So we are in the middle of this tight loop around the sun right before it goes way out there into its longer half of its cycle. That is why for the past century or less, there's been a lot of rapid change happening because Pluto has been going through half of these signs very quickly and just disrupting everything. It's just like change, 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 and then it slows down on this side. So that is why we're seeing so much change happen so fast in this time, because it's been going through so many signs so quickly. So that's Saturn and Pluto by themselves. Together, Saturn and Pluto go conjunct every 31 to 7 years. And so every 31 to 7 years they go conjunct in a new sign. But Saturn and Pluto's complete cycle, going all the way back to where it started, lasts about 735 to 36 years. So this 31 to 37 year period is the microcycle of Saturn and Pluto being in one sign, and this 735 year period is like the macro cycle of Saturn and Pluto going all the way back around to where they started. So just to put things in perspective, the last time that Pluto and Saturn were conjunct in Capricorn was in 1518, but the last time that they were extremely close to the same spot, the last time we were in this same place where we started, was 1284, 735 years ago. So it's like we're completing this huge macro cycle that's been happening since 1284. And so the microcycle of Saturn and Pluto being in each sign, the last one was in 1982. Saturn and Pluto were conjunct in Libra. Before that, it was 1947. They were conjunct in Leo. And before that, it was 1914, and they were conjunct in Cancer. So let's look at what was kind of going on during each of those transits so we can get a feel for how big a deal this conjunction is. And okay, there's a lot of information out there. I could list so many events that have happened on these dates because there's so much going on in the world, but just to keep it simple and for the sake of time, I will just list a few like major things that have happened during these transits. Between 1914 and 1947 was Pluto and Saturn's cycle in Cancer. So around 1914, World War I begins, and then if you go around to the opposition, that was in 1931. That is when Hitler started to bring fascism to Germany. The Nazi Party comes to power, and then we know like what all happens after that, of course, the Holocaust and just all of those terrible things. 1931 was also when the Great Depression had just started. Then moving forward in 1947, when Saturn and Pluto go conjunct in Leo, that ends the Cancer cycle. And it was around that time that the last Nazi leaders were hanged or sentenced to life in prison. This is also when the UN was formed. And so it kind of just marks the beginning of end of this cycle. It's like things kind of came to a closing and the themes of that cycle came to an end. But of course, when you come to an ending, it's not like all your problems are resolved because you're marking a new cycle. And so more problems emerge and thus initiates a new cycle of events and experiences and growth and learning that continues forever and ever. So in 1947, the Cold War begins, and then we have all of that stuff going on. I'm going to jump ahead to 1982. That was when Saturn and Pluto go conjunct in Libra, and that was when the economic recession hit. It was the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression. It was also when there was a lot of mass fear about a nuclear apocalypse. It's also when the movie The Day After aired, which kind of played out the fantasies in everyone's mind of this nuclear apocalypse world. So that was the beginning of the cycle. And then of course the opposition is 2001. And we all know what happens in 2001. It was the 9/11 terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. And I think it's really interesting to note that during this opposition, Pluto was in Sagittarius and Saturn was in Gemini. So of course Sagittarius rules the travel industry, towers. Pluto being in Sagittarius was pretty symbolic of a major change happening in the travel industry. Gemini is also a travel sign, and Saturn being in Gemini is just kind of interesting because Gemini is the twins and the twin towers came down, so pretty interesting coincidence there. 2020 is when we are coming back to the end of that cycle, and we are going to conclude this 30-something year cycle since 1982. So like I said, the exact conjunction of Saturn and Pluto is happening on January 12th, 2020, which also, little fun fact, that happens to be Jeff Bezos' birthday, so there could be some big things happening for him around that time, especially. Just interesting to look out for that maybe. So this conjunction is extra special because not only do we have Saturn and Pluto being conjunct in Capricorn, we also have Mercury and Ceres, and we have the Sun, which is kind of like shining a spotlight on all of this, and we have the South Node. There is a major stellium happening in Capricorn in January 2020, and it's kind of a big deal. Okay, not only do we have that, we also have a solar eclipse happening on December 26, 2019, and on January 10th, 2020, we have a lunar eclipse in Cancer. So I just want to talk a little bit real quick about the North and South nodes, because with the South node being in Capricorn and the North node being in Capricorn, Capricorn. What did I just say? With the South node being in Capricorn and the North node being in Cancer, it's also interesting to note how that is adding to the dynamic of this whole transit. So the South node archetype is all about where we've been, what we've mastered in past lives, what comes natural to us, what there may be an excess of, and what we need to move away from to balance ourselves out. So the North node is all about where we're going, what we need to aspire to, what we need to master to balance out the South node, the place where we're coming from. So the lunar nodes switched in November 2018. This Cancer Capricorn dynamic has been going on since late 2018, and it will remain there until May 2020. The Capricorn Cancer dynamic is this balance between the father and mother. You have this strict father who is imposing all of these rules and discipline. On the other side, you have Cancer, the loving, nurturing, protective mother. So with the Saturn being in Capricorn, we've had a lot of patriarchal themes going on in society, right? We have a big emphasis on status, and a lot of people try to get that money. It's all about aspiring to something, maintaining your social status. That's been a big theme with our South node being in Capricorn. So what kind of balances out a lot of masculine energies is in Cancer Cancer, our north node, which places a big emphasis on nurturing ourselves emotionally, physically, every way. A big emphasis on family, where we feel at home, and how we feel secure on the inside. And with these eclipses happening, it's kind of symbolic of a fresh start, right? The eclipses symbolize rebirth and renewal, and having that Cancer North Node opposition pretty much exactly at the time of the Saturn Pluto conjunction over here in Capricorn, I see that as adding this wave of emotion to the mix. There's going to be a lot of extra emotional tension with the moon opposing this Capricorn stellium. So that's just an interesting thing to throw into the mix there. And so going back to what I was saying about this conjunction being the conclusion of a Saturn-Pluto cycle that has been going on since 1982, I've been thinking a lot about what this past cycle has meant for us and the Libra themes that have been going on. It seems like with the fear of the nuclear war happening and with the 9/11 terrorist attacks and thinking about all of the things that are going on in our society right now, there seems to be a lot of fear and terror going on. And a big theme that I see with this being a Libra cycle is justice. Justice for one's race, gender, ethnicity, religion. There's just a lot of tension around justice for one's self-belief, people, all of that. So we may see something kind of associated with that theme happen in 2020. We may see kind of a movement past that, hopefully. I don't know if that will ever end, but I think that's something to keep in mind when you're anticipating the events of 2020. We are ending this cycle of events that have been happening since 1982. Also, I meant to say this earlier, but Pluto actually went into Capricorn in 2008. 2008 is when we had the market crash, the big recession, because Pluto had first entered Capricorn and was exposing the Capricornian structures, the big businesses. Okay, another thing that I want to talk about is the United States is having its Pluto return right about the same time as this opposition. It's between 2022 to 2024, depending on what astrology system you use. Like I said, Pluto goes through a 248-year orbit to get back to where it started. And just like people have birth charts, countries can have birth charts too. So when the Constitution was signed and the United States was officially formed in 1776, Pluto has been going on its merry way around the sun, and it is coming right back to where it started in 2024. So this is the United States' first Pluto return, and Pluto is a relatively new astrological figure. We haven't known about Pluto for very long, so there really hasn't been much experience with Pluto returns, but based on the archetypes that we already know about Pluto and the nature of an astrological cycle, is that it symbolizes the end of something, the conclusion of things that have been happening over the past 248 years, and Pluto is the enactor of karma. I don't know if I said this earlier, but Saturn is the lord of karma, and Pluto is the one that initiates the karma to happen. So in this Pluto return, Pluto may be bringing up all the lies and corruption and nasty, terrible things that have happened in the past 248 years, and it's going to conclude that. It wants to wipe the slate clean. There's kind of been this speculation and this questioning of the founding principles that this nation was built on. That's kind of been something that's been on people's minds. And of course we have, you know, the presidential election happening next year in 2020, and so this just seems like a very significant year for the structures that are governing our lives, especially for the US. And I also want to note that Britain has the same Pluto return going on too, because when the United States gained independence from Great Britain, that kind of marked this beginning of Great Britain too. So Britain is going through their Pluto return right now, and this probably explains what's been going on with Brexit, you know, Britain trying to leave the EU and all that stuff. I don't know much about all of that, but it's just interesting to know that that's going on in Britain right now too, because they're having their Pluto return as well. So this whole thing is kind of a big deal. Like, we are living through one of the most condensed moments of change. All of these astrological events, like big things happening in such a short amount of time, this is a pretty rare time. 2020 is feeling like a pretty pivotal moment in history. It may not be obvious when we're going through it, but I feel strongly that way down in the future, we're gonna look back on this 5 to 10 year period that's happening right now as being a huge shift in our human evolution. We are reaching the end of an astrological cycle. So I've been feeling this for a while. I made a video back in September about how I've been feeling a lot of intense, frantic energy and these premonitions of something about to happen. There just seems to be a lot of anticipation of this big event. A lot of people just feel like something's about to happen. Typically, when you reach the end of an astrological age, this is when all of the doomsday fears start to erupt in society. It's like everyone can kind of sense this shift that we're going through, but obviously no one can really know what's going to happen. No one really knows what to do with these energies. At the last end of a cycle in 1982, everyone literally thought the world was going to end because of the fear of the nuclear apocalypse. There was so much fear and anxiety because we were coming to the conclusion of that astrological cycle. Well, we are at that point again. So we're seeing a lot of like anticipation of this big change that's about to happen. There's been a lot of talk about the second coming of Christ, the rapture. We're on the horizon of a new world order. World War III is in the air. And all of this talk about the new earth and the ascension that's been gaining a lot of momentum lately. It's like people are really starting to feel this accumulation of energy, and it's manifesting itself in all these different ways based on beliefs that people have. We also see a lot of anxiety around climate change and the environment that's getting like really tense right now. We're seeing a lot of fears coming up about AI and the fusion of humans with technology, transhumanism. I just made a video about the fusion of humans with technology, like my future predictions for that too. So I'm not immune. I'm feeling it too. It's actually interesting because I have a quantum healing hypnosis session, my second QHHT session of me, that I posted a few months ago, and I really wanted to explore this premonition I was having about technology in 2020, the future. This was before I even knew anything about this conjunction, about what was happening astrologically, but in that session my higher self came through and told me that the system would implode in 2020. I'll link my session below and y'all can check that out if you want, but this was before I knew about anything that was happening astrologically in 2020. I kind of got this information about 2020 being a significant year for government and that the system would basically implode. Will that actually happen? Will that literally happen to that degree? Maybe not. I tend to be pretty like melodramatic, but there's definitely something in the air. There's definitely this undercurrent of anticipation circulating through the collective conscious right now. There's this thickening atmosphere of anxiety. We see that in all of the talk about mental illness happening right now. All of these fears are rising to the surface because the energy is accumulating and people are feeling so anxious. It's triggering an awakening, it's triggering psychosis, it's triggering these crazy events, just all of the things that have been happening lately. It's accumulating to the end of this astrological cycle. So I feel like after that some of the tension will probably let off, but I just want to shed light on the fact that there is a cosmic explanation for what's been going on. Everything is cyclical. So we're feeling the intensity of the dawn of a new age, but it never ends. We're beginning a new cycle. So I've talked a lot about the archetypes and the history and the significance of this transit on a collective scale, but it is very significant to each individual on a personal level as well. And the focus of this transit, the house that it affects, depends on your rising sign. So I'll put a little key over here somewhere about what house this will be affecting in your chart based on your rising sign. For me, I'm a Gemini rising, so this is all happening in my 8th house. So I'm definitely feeling these themes of death and rebirth happening right now. This big transformation. It definitely feels like a pivotal moment in my life on a personal level. But no matter what house this transit is happening in for you, the Saturn Pluto conjunction is going to have a lot to do with what structures structures need to die in your life? What structures are governing your life that may not be serving you anymore? This could be physical structures. Maybe you're moving, you're clearing things out, you're changing your lifestyle. It could be beliefs. Your belief system is changing. It's definitely going to be a time where Pluto is going to bring forth these things that you may have been ignoring in your life, these problems that you may have been denying, avoiding, and pushing away. And if you've been doing that, Pluto is going to bring all of that stuff up to the surface. And I know that sounds pretty bad, but like I said, these are the moments that have to happen in order to initiate change and growth. We need these little boosts from the stars sometimes to propel us forward in our own evolution. So whether you're ready or not, this conjunction is going to show you something that needs to be dealt with, something that needs to be changed. And the worst thing you can do is resist this change, because the more you try to resist it and avoid it, the more likely you are to manifest a catastrophe in your life that is just going to bring it all right up to the front of your attention and make you deal with it. So no matter how this conjunction manifests for you, I think the best way to prepare for this transition is to really dig deep. Ask yourself what triggers you and what makes you really mad, and figure out where that is coming from in you. Pluto and Saturn are asking you to really step up and take responsibility for what's been lurking around in your shadow. It may show you the worst parts of yourself so you can really see what you've been doing and what you've been suppressing, so you can deal with it and change and grow. So this is an extremely positive transit in that regard. Let's think about it that way. This can be an extremely empowering transit because it may provide you with opportunities to step up and take your power back. If you don't take responsibility for yourself and if you don't take your power back, it will be taken from you. I'm getting this sink or swim vibe. Let go or be dragged. The key here is just to be as conscious and responsible as you can. It may not feel so good in the beginning, but taking responsibility for what the things that you need to work on and accepting those faults in yourself, those flaws, and owning up to them, that feels way better than casting blame on everyone else for blaming all of these outer things for your happiness and joy. Because when you're allowing your vibration to be dependent on all of these outer sources, you don't have control. So this Saturn-Pluto conjunction is asking you it's forcing you, rather, to step up and take control. Take responsibility and own up to the things that you need to work on and deal with it. It's that strict father that's like, alright, this is you. I'm gonna show you yourself and you need to deal with it. You need to fix this. What part of you needs to die and go away in order to make room for this new you to blossom? One more thing, I just want to conclude by reading this little passage from The Outer Planets and Their Cycles by Liz Green, which includes a series of lectures that were given in 1980 leading up to the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1982. It's all about how we can't really use astrology to predict the future, but rather the archetypal themes that will be in play during these cycles and transits and all of that. So let me just get my reading glasses on here. It might be very helpful and relevant to us all if we could learn to distinguish a symbol from a concrete prognostication of doom. The millenarian myth is a cyclical myth and has a tendency to erupt at regular intervals from the collective psyche at points of great change. If we don't make the effort to understand what might be trying to emerge on an inner level, then we compel the myth to actualize in the most concrete form, and then we really will have the end of the world because we possess the technology to bring it about. Obviously, something is happening to us all. Each person's perception of it is colored by his own psychic constitution, his own dreams and aspirations and visions and insecurities and fears and parents and ideologies. I have yet to be convinced of such a thing as complete objectivity. Perhaps all one can do is be conscious of where the individual ends and the collective begins, and be aware of the mythic element in our terror of Holocaust. This is a time of immense mythic blossoming, although you wouldn't think it if you turned on the television. But the dawn of a new astrological age always releases new myths. These themes are all around us, and astrologers are particularly particularly subjected to them. The end of the world, the return of the golden age, the vengeance of God, the cleansing of sins. So I think it is a wise idea to remember these things when next someone asks you in terror if the conjunction means the end of the world. The way we feel about these things reflects our own individual capacity to cope with these changes that are around and inside us. The blind fatalism of a negative or positive kind are both ways of avoiding the very difficult and ambivalent place in the middle, where there might be some choice, but where the choice ultimately depends on the individual responsibility. So I thought that was a good way to sum up this video. I will just leave it off with that because I feel like this video is going to be pretty long. Sorry if it was too much, too rambly, but I had a lot to say about it. I'll probably be making a lot more videos about astrology as my interest is just growing and growing by the day. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, I will catch you guys in the next one. Stay woke.